The Bees is a 1978 sci-fi horror film from director Alfredo Zacharias. The movie opens with...
Oh, no, not the bees! Not the bees!
No, not that bee movie, the other bee movie. Not that one either. Anyway, the movie opens with bees. This movie is already making me itchy. After the bees montage, we get a voiceover explaining the backstory.
A few years ago, African honeybees were imported to Brazil. They bred with the local species, producing a new, aggressive, and dangerous strain that, without provocation, attacked and killed countless animals and scores of humans.
So, different breeds of bees mixed and created some kinda super bee. The aggressive nature of this has allowed them to spread like wildfire over South America. Meanwhile, while the killer bees are running rampant, this father and son duo decide it's a good idea to steal honey from a lab trying to stop them.
Papa, I'm afraid to go in there.
Afraid? Nothing to be afraid of. We use plenty of smoke. Bees go to sleep.
The bees have only killed hundreds of people and animals. What is there to be afraid of? I've got smoke!
What does that say?
It says honey.
This guy's the human version of Winnie the Pooh. They break into not exactly Fort Knox to steal the honey. About 5 seconds later, they manage to piss off the bees, so they run away. Inside the house, Sandy goes to see her husband, Dr. Franklin Miller. She's certainly not, beating around the bush.
Franklin, when are you coming to bed?
What's the matter? Can't you sleep?
Well, sleeping isn't what I had in mind.
Come on, woman, what do you want from me? I'm like 70. They haven't invented Viagra yet. Just then, one of the assistants comes to tell him the bees have gotten loose. Here's something I don't think has ever happened before. Well, darling, I'd love to stay for the sex, but I have to wrangle up some escaped bees. I'm not a bee expert, but shouldn't they be using a lot more smoke? The son's trying to get away, but is repeatedly stung. He jumps in a stream, and instead of trying to swim away underwater, he screams until he dies. The next day, the assistant's fixing the broken door. Stupid honey thieves! Sandy and Dr. Miller are having breakfast when he notices something funny.
Oh, sure. It's just that Rosa is trying to get me pregnant.
Wait, what? Oh, I'm guessing something in the food Rosa cooked is an aphrodisiac.
She eat plenty yerba santa, have plenty babies.
Maybe hold off on the kids until after the killer bee research? Dr. Miller was looking into their accounting and noticed someone in the agricultural department has been skimming money off the top. This explains why they couldn't afford security. Just then, the locals arrive and are not too happy. Yeah, that idiot tried to steal honey from your killer beehive and got stung a bunch, and it's your fault! Dr. Miller reminds them what he's doing. Things seem to be going well until the thief shows up with his dead kid. Wait, when he died, he wasn't wearing shoes. Did his dad put shoes on him before carrying him over? Maybe he'll have a moment of self-reflection when he realizes that he was the reason why his son died a horrible death. No, it's all this guy's fault! Burn the village! Burn it! Although don't just burn it, also loot it! The doctor locks Sandy in the freezer while he goes out to get his research. The mob robs him and knocks him out. Then the bees get him. Franklin's assistant rescues Sandy. Meanwhile, in New York, stock footage! Dr. John Norman's having a meeting with some government liaisons from around the globe to discuss the bee epidemic. They pass around jars of bees like it's show and tell. Why would these guys be taking the risk? I'm sure they all know what bees look like. Norman explains that with the help of Dr. Hummel, they're creating a new hybrid that'll be less aggressive than the African bee. The representative from Uganda has a suggestion. Combat! Dr. Hummel's had it with this meeting. The jar's too tight to unscrew, so he just knocks it on the floor. Oh no, bees! We then cut to the opening of Night Court. The bees have infiltrated the U.S. disguised as taxi drivers! Oh wait, it's just Sandy coming home after the death of her husband. Sandy gets into an elevator with the two totally not crooks.
Oh, would you punch 6 for me, please?
Oh, I'm gonna punch something alright. Geez, 5 minutes in New York and already she's getting robbed. Well, that's why the cops called it Fear City. The crooks open her luggage to discover it's filled with bees! Since the evildoers are now dead, Sandy casually recovers her luggage. She goes upstairs to find Dr. Norman in mid-makeout session. Why was the door open? Dr. Norman sees bruises all over Sandy and tells her he needs to give her some medicine. Excuse me, miss, why is your luggage buzzing? He apologizes and offers condolences for the death of her husband. This is, however, 1970s John Saxon, so I'm sure they'll be romantically linked later in the film. Alicia opens the case and gets a good stingin'. Sandy recaptures the escaped bee and confuses Dr. Norman.
What does that mean?
Well, it probably stung your friend.
Well, will she be all right?
She'll be dead in a couple of minutes.
Wait a minute, I mean my friend.
He then convinces her to stay the night. The next day, Dr. Norman is doing this. Sandy decided to skip pants today. Just then, Dr. Hummel shows up. Dr. Hummel is Sandy's Uncle Ziggy.
My dear, where are your pants?
This is my niece, Sondra Miller.
We've met.
So I see.
Even he knows what's up. She healed quickly. The next day, they meet up with some investors. They need money to reopen the research into the bees. However, the investors just want to use the bees for fun and profit.
But are you saying you want to use these killer bees now? Just to get more honey?
The investors aren't interested in the severity of the situation, so Dr. Norman shuts them down. Dr. Hummel's afraid the investors will just find a new way to import the bees, so he suggests finding a way to eliminate them. The bees, that is, not the investors. Meanwhile, 5 seconds later, one of the investors offers Dr. Miller's old assistant an all-expenses-paid vacation if he smuggles bees into the U.S. The flight has an emergency landing in Mexico City. The assistant dies on his way into the country because, and I'm not kidding, he's wearing a belt filled with bees. This lady goes to the bathroom to do what you always do in the bathroom. Eat donuts. Only her donuts are covered in bees. One sting and she's a goner. This version of Baywatch is really disappointing. More bee-related death. Back in Dr. Norman's lab, he's been working with the bees. He tells Sandy they've been using radiation on the bees, and how could this possibly backfire? Next thing you know, Mexico's overrun by bees. Okay, Ted, we need you to overact. And go! The radioactive bees take over a large system of caves to build their hives. This genius decides it's a good idea to play ball near this giant buzzing cave. A couple's making out on the beach. You think a giant swarm of killer bees would be a good enough reason to send out an emergency broadcast.
We interrupt this broadcast with the following message. Bees!
The bees seem to be focused solely on attacking beaches. This guy hires kids to capture some bees to sting his legs. Everybody's got a fetish.
Well, you see, I got a little problem with my legs called rheumatism. It hurts. It hurts all the time.
Yeah, so?
But, you might not believe it, the bee stings makes it feel better.
This kid finds out about the cash for bees deal. He wants in, so he tries to knock down an entire hive. The angry bees then kill everyone in the park.
Ow, my legs! Sting my legs, you blasted bees!
The bees have now made their way to San Diego.
All right, gentlemen, what we need to do is nuke the bees!
The reporter proceeds to announce that the bee-related death toll is up to 46. I don't think John Carradine's acting here. I think he really fell asleep. Dr. Norman and Sandy head to the local woods to try a new anti-bee formula they developed. He mentions the radiation from the radar dishes may have had an effect on the bees. Sandy sprays the hives, which makes the workers go crazy and kill the queen. This makes the bees in the cave very upset. The duo heads to their car for safety. Oh, make love to me, here, amongst the bees. She seems to have gotten over the death of her husband rather quickly. Over at the Tournament of Roses parade, stock footage. I sure hope this parade isn't invaded by bees. The audience panics and chaos ensues. The government bad guys are talking next to the totally not just a picture of the Capitol building. Either they overdid it on the color correction, or this guy really needs to lay off the 3 martini lunches. One of the investors from earlier is explaining to the head of agriculture how someone stole imported bee sperm and released killer bees into the US. The head suggests they do something quickly before there's an internal investigation.
So what Dr. Hummel proposes is the synthetic manufacture of this chemical, which is known as a pherone, and can be sprayed into the atmosphere, and we believe cause the drones to become confused and attempt to mate with each other rather than with the queen bee.
Dr. Norman's stunned that they agree to give him financial aid before he even finishes explaining his proposal. Back at the lab, Dr. Hummel is watching BTV. Dr. Norman drives 1 block over to see Sandy. He tells her and Dr. Hummel they got the funding. Dr. Hummel explains to Dr. Norman that he's decoded the language of the bees. He's talking to the bees. All the bees are relaxed, so Sandy can hold up a plate to them and make goofy faces. Then things get weird.
Hey, that kiss was for me, not for you. After all, she is my niece.
That's adding incest to injury.
Dr. Norman gets the okay to mass-produce the pheromone that'll eliminate the killer bees but not harm the others. Then the stock footage swings into action, spraying the pheromone all over the bees' breeding grounds. Sandy comes in with the newspaper announcing the country is almost completely killer bee free. Dr. Hummel's looking at Dr. Miller's notes and discovers that someone was stealing money from his research. Dr. Norman gets a call from a pretty decent Jimmy Carter impersonator. The agricultural department gives an award to Dr. Hummel for his research that stopped the killer bees. After the meeting, he presents the guy with proof that someone was embezzling from the department. And it's totally not this guy. He immediately calls some hired goons on his giant phone. The bad guys sneak into the lab and shoot Dr. Hummel. Just then, all the bees escape on a mission to avenge Dr. Hummel. Sandy really wants to look at Dr. Norman.
Let me look at you. I just want to look at you.
I missed you.
No, I want to look at you.
Why won't you just relax and let me look at you? Dr. Norman and Sandy arrive to find the dead assassins and a fatally wounded Hummel. Before he dies, he explains that because of the mixture of radiation and chemicals, they've created a new species of super bee. Bees that are as smart as man. One of the criminals survived, so Dr. Norman kills him with bees. Since Dr. Hummel's dead, the smart bees are going all John Wick. The head of agriculture opens his closet to discover bees! Then this happens. Over at this picture of the Capitol building, the local Air Force base is scrambling its jets. All right, gentlemen, it's time for Operation Bomb the Bees. And now Phase 2, Burn the Bees. Then some airplanes blow up. Dr. Norman explains he's trying to follow up with Dr. Hummel's research so he can talk to the bees. Okay, let's see. Bzz, 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 bzz. That night, oh dear Lord, Dr. Norman realizes they're trying to communicate with him. The next day, Dr. Norman has a summit at the UN to tell them about the smart bees. The audience, of course, thinks he's nuts.
Good Lord, this chap's gone completely raging bonkers.
He pleads with them, but it's falling on deaf ears.
Would you kindly listen to me and try to understand what I'm telling you? And please believe me.
You have to listen. You have to listen what the bees have to say.
Oh, now you done it.
What's this? The UN isn't listening to John Saxon talking about hyper-intelligent bees? A freight container filled with a large amount of bees ought to put a stop to that!
The bees infiltrate the room, and Dr. Norman gets everyone to calm down to listen to their demands.
From now on, they will dominate the earth equally with mankind. Or without mankind, depending on whether or not we accept their terms. I know you will accept. There's no other way to survive.
Wait, that's it? Well, I guess what else could they do? Show them signing a bee treaty and getting a bee representative at the UN? The movie was shot mostly in various locations in Mexico. The film was written, produced, and directed by Alfredo Zacharias. Originally, Jack Hill was going to direct, but he was let go over creative differences, and Zacharias decided to take over. Zacharias had plenty of experience directing. He'd been making films in Mexico since the late 60s. Zacharias got the idea for the bees after receiving a jar of killer bee honey as a gift. He wrote the film as a warning that mankind was destroying nature, and nature was fighting back. This is also one of the rare films where, in the end, mankind loses to the monster. Humans had to make a peace agreement with the bees or they'd wipe us out. The movie was to be distributed by Roger Corman's New World Pictures. After principal photography, Corman had a meeting with some of the executives at Warner Brothers. Seems they also had a bee movie in the works called The Swarm. They paid Corman a substantial amount of money to delay the bees until after The Swarm. Corman gave some of that money to Zacharias, who happily used the additional funds to improve the visual effects in the film. Zacharias had an odd demand for the film. For every scene with dialogue, it had to be shot twice. Once in English, and once in Spanish. He did this because he didn't want the film to look dubbed. They had an Austrian beekeeper for the film. In order to make sure no one was stung, they hired dozens of women to cut the tips off the bee's stinger, which prevented them from hurting anyone. They had to work throughout the entire shoot because they brought in tens of thousands of bees. The Swarm was released on July 14th, 1978, and was a flop. The film only grossed about $10 million, which didn't come close to covering its $21 million budget. This worried Zacharias. They decided to put some distance between the movies and released The Bees on November 17, 1978. While the film was not a big hit, since it cost significantly less than The Swarm, it didn't need to make that much to recoup its budget. While there aren't exact records for how much it made, the director said it turned a nice profit. The Bees is something you need to see to fully believe. You've got classic actors like John Saxon and John Carradine doing their best to stay serious during what is undeniably silly. Then you have Angel Tompkins, who played the teacher in Crown International's hit The Teacher back in 1974. She's obviously having fun and brings a certain amount of joy to the production. She's smart and sweet, not some ditzy assistant. She pairs incredibly well against a pro like Saxon. The Bees is one of the most bizarre films I've talked about. On paper, the idea might work, but in execution, you have an award-winning actor making buzzing sounds. While the film may not appeal to mainstream crowds, low-budget fans will love this. It is so much fun. If you're into this sort of thing, I give it a very high recommendation. It's definitely worth tracking down. It's that magical mixture of terrible and wonderful. The Bees is an excellent bee movie.